everyone. Welcome to another Tech Talk Tuesday, also part of Cybersecurity Awareness Month for the month of October. So we're going to talk a lot about cybersecurity, and this week's Tech Talk Tuesday is Your Password Sucks. So we're going to talk about strong passwords, why passwords are important, and ways to strengthen your password even further, as well as some of the risks involved with some bad password behavior. We'll call it password behavior. So first of all, why passwords are important for cybersecurity. The importance of strong passwords in cybersecurity cannot be overstated. Passwords are one of the primary mechanisms that protect our digital information and resources. Here's why strong passwords are critical. So first of all, passwords will eventually go away. Microsoft is kind of slowly implementing this, and maybe a few other platforms that can roll this out for now, where you'll just have some other authentication method, most likely a smartphone or something like that. But a password is basically the keys to the kingdom for businesses and for your personal information. So you wouldn't just leave, $20,000 lying around on your front porch for someone to walk by and grab. Well, if you don't have a password on your bank account, it's basically the same thing if you have $20,000 in your bank account. But it is the first line of defense. Passwords act as the first barrier between your data and unauthorized users. In many cases, it's the only thing stopping a hacker from accessing your personal or professional information. Right. Another reason, rising cyber threats. With increasing incidents of cyber attacks globally, using strong passwords has become even more essential. Attackers often use tools to guess passwords, and simple, easily guessable passwords can be cracked in mere seconds. There are tools out there, and later on I'll even show you a tool you can use to check how strong your password is. But there are tools out there that can crack somewhat easier passwords in a few seconds. And those tools are free. You can download them for free. As an example, years ago, I was working for a cable company, doesn't service this area, but a cable company in another part of the state, where they rolled out new routers, and the routers were supposed to be secured from admin access from the customers that received the routers. And I guessed the password to the router within 5 minutes. So again, sometimes passwords are just easy to guess based on information you may already have. Passwords protect personal and financial information. Strong passwords are especially crucial for accounts that hold sensitive information. If someone were to gain unauthorized access to your bank account, email, or personal files, they could inflict significant personal and financial harm. Passwords prevent unauthorized access. Beyond stealing information, strong passwords also prevent unauthorized users from making changes. This is particularly vital for services or software where changes can lead to monetary loss or data breaches. They guard against brute force attacks. Hackers use software to input as many password combinations as possible to hack into an account. The simpler the password, the easier and faster it is to crack. Strong passwords are resistant to such attacks due to the vast number of potential combinations. Think about it as the Powerball, got up to close to 2 billion again before somebody won it. Because of the number of combinations, it's harder to win the Powerball. It's the same with passwords. The longer the password, the more different characters you're using, the harder it is to crack. And again, that software to crack passwords is freely available. I have it installed here on computers. I've had people in the past say, I can't get on my computer. I don't know the password. I forgot the password. And I'm able to get in on Windows computers. It's easy to do. Passwords protect work-related information. In a professional setting, strong passwords protect not just one person's data, but often a whole company's data. A breach can lead to significant financial losses, reputation damage, and legal consequences, especially if you maintain customer data. Passwords minimize risk of other attacks. Once a hacker gains access to one of your accounts, they can potentially use it to carry out further attacks, send out phishing emails from your account, and I will share an example that just was alerted to today, or even reset passwords for other services you use. Passwords uphold personal privacy. Just think about if somebody gained access to your email account, what they might end up seeing in your email account. A lot of personal data in our digital age, a lot of personal data from private conversations to photos is stored online. Strong passwords ensure that your privacy is maintained and that your personal life remains personal. Passwords reduce potential for identity theft. With enough personal data, malicious actors can impersonate you, taking out loans, making purchases, or committing fraud in your name. How many times do we hear about somebody filing a tax return for someone else that they're not related to? They just pretend to be that person. Well, if they have enough information, it's not hard to do. You have the social security number, which they may have gotten through breaking into your TurboTax account or something like that. Passwords promote a culture of security. Adopting strong passwords and educating others to do the same fosters a culture where cybersecurity is taken seriously. This has ripple effects, encouraging the adoption of other good security practices. And finally, to maximize security, it's recommended that individuals not only use strong passwords, and we'll talk about what that means in a few slides, but also consider additional measures like two-factor authentication, which adds another layer of security beyond just the password. Furthermore, with the rising complexity of password, using a password manager alleviates the challenges that you'll face with maintaining strong passwords. Two different passwords. Sure, we can all figure out which one is the easier one to hack, but I'm going to share a story. This first one here, uppercase P, @ and then the rest of the word password. Met a client a few years back who was working in politics, is a lawyer, was working in politics, and this was the password to his email account. I made him change it immediately. The second one is one I randomly generated. I'm going to show you how to do that later. But I randomly generated this 20-character password. You can see why this is much harder to crack. This one is a guess. You can guess this. It is one of the most common passwords still used to date. Most common passwords include, this is going to shock you, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is still the single most common password used today. And the word password is still used quite a bit. They are also show up every year on the list of top 25 cracked passwords and variations of those passwords. Sequential number variations of sequential numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, because most systems now don't even allow you to use just 6 characters. So we'll just go up to 8, or 7 or 5 continue to be popular choices and regularly feature in the top 10 of hacked passwords. Simple words and patterns. Other commonly used passwords include simple patterns such as QWERTY. That's the first 5 keys on your keyboard. Or easily guessable words like admin, welcome, and let me in. Name-based passwords is also common for people to use first names such as Ashley, Michael, or Charlie as passwords. It's common for people to use their children's names and birthdays and things like that in passwords. If you ever watch some of those movies where somebody's trying to figure out the combination of something and they ask, oh, what is this kid's birthday's name? Birthdays. Sports and entertainment themes from popular culture such as Superman, Pokemon, or football often appear in a list of common passwords. Overall stats is studied by the UK's National Cybersecurity Center, which is the equivalent of CISA here in the US, found that 23.2 million victim accounts worldwide used 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as a password. 23 million. Reuse passwords. It's not just the simplicity of these passwords that's concerning. The reuse of passwords across multiple platforms is another issue. A survey by Google found that 52% of respondents reused the same password for multiple accounts and 13% used the same password for all their accounts. It's pretty scary. And I'm going to tell you why in a few moments. I'm going to share an example from today. Awareness doesn't equal action. Despite heightened awareness about the importance of strong, unique passwords, many people still don't follow best practices. A report by Digital Guardian showed that while 91% of respondents understand the risks of reusing passwords across multiple accounts, only 59% do not. Only 59% avoid reusing passwords across multiple accounts. So even though people are aware, they're still not doing it. And so here are some statistics for you. So 30% of internet users have experienced a data breach due to a weak password. And I would venture to guess it's more than that. I have personally experienced this in 2015 or 2016. My LinkedIn account, along with, I don't remember how many millions now, was breached. And the password at the time was an easy to guess password based on family members. I'll just leave it at that. And so that password, so all those passwords that were breached on LinkedIn, and I think it was, I want to say it was 16 million people, but I don't know for sure, maybe more than that. But 16 million passwords have now been put on the dark web. So that password that I was using then is on the dark web. So anytime somebody tries to log into something that belongs to me, a hacker, they will try that password and username combination. I no longer use the same email address on LinkedIn either. So neither one of them will work on LinkedIn or anywhere else for that matter. But because that password is now on a list, that list of 16 billion passwords that's on the internet now, which means there's about 2 billion two passwords for every person on the planet on this list. Those passwords are tried all the time against different things. 2/3 of Americans use the same password across multiple accounts. We talked about that a moment ago. Again, the most commonly used password is 1234556. 59% of US adults use birthdays or names in their passwords. Very dangerous. We talked about this one a minute ago. 13% of Americans use the same password for every account, which is really, really dangerous. 37% use two-factor authentication, so that could be better. 36% kept track of passwords on paper. I know of a couple of IT providers that encourage this behavior. Walk around with a notebook with all your passwords in it. Well, the problem with that is what happens if you lose that notebook? 34% regularly changed passwords. There are two schools of thought on this. One is if you're constantly changing passwords, you're going to start using patterns to help you remember what the passwords are. So if you use the word password for your password, you'll use password 1, then password 2, then password 3, and you'll do this and it'll make it easier to guess. But the other school of thought is, well, if a hacker has your password, they now have access to whatever that password logs into. They're going to maintain access until you change the password. So this is why we typically we say change password anywhere between 45 and 60 days, but we also educate and encourage people not to use patterns. And 15% use password managers, which is surprisingly low. And we'll get to password managers in a little bit. Some common password mistakes. Using simple passwords like 123456, password, admin, or let me in, which are easy to guess. Reusing passwords, using the same passwords across multiple sites or platforms, which increases the risk if one account is compromised. So if my Facebook account is compromised and I use that same password for my bank account, now my bank account could potentially be compromised because they will then take, and it's a script, they will take this password and try it against a bunch of different sites. So yes, there are, I don't know, hundreds of banks, thousands of banks in the world. Well, they have a script that will run within a few seconds to test it against all those different banks. Or maybe they have some other information about you and know where you bank. Not changing default passwords. So if you have a router or a printer or some other, a smart TV or some other device in your office or in your home that connects to the internet and you don't change the default password, it is that much easier to break into that device. Let me see what here. I had a geek expert tell me list sensitive information like passwords in a word processing document. Thieves don't usually open the document. It said, is this helpful? That is really not a good idea. In fact, one of the ways we use to determine if a computer or a network is being compromised is by creating a document, a fake document, and we call it password. because the first thing that somebody that compromises or breaches that device will check is sensitive documents. So they will open up password, whatever I name it, password list .doc. And once they open it, I will get an alert saying somebody opened it. That's one of the ways it's called a honeypot or a canary. And that's one of the ways we determine if a client is being breached. So that's the first thing to look for, that and like tax documents and things like that, bank account information. But change those default passwords on your devices. I've gone into numerous companies and found printers with the default password on them still. Using personal information, incorporating easily accessible or guessable information such as birthdays, names of family members, or anniversaries, which, by the way, this is a reason I don't even post my birthday on the internet. You will not find my real birthday on Facebook. I don't know if I put a fake one, but you will definitely not find my real birthday on there. I don't post, I usually don't post birthday information anywhere either. Not that it's hard to find. It's not that hard to find, but I'm not going to make it easier. Short passwords, opting for passwords that are too short. Longer passwords are generally more secure. I usually use 20 characters. It's recommended to be at least 12. By most experts, I usually use 20. Lacking variety, not using a mix of characters. A strong password should include a combination of uppercase, lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. Not updating passwords, keeping the same password for prolonged periods of time without updating or changing it. Again, they recommend usually between 45 and 60 days. On Microsoft account, Microsoft or Google accounts, we recommend 1 year, but that's assuming you're monitoring for suspicious activity like logins from outside the US or things like that. Sharing passwords, telling passwords to friends, family, or co-workers, or sending them through insecure means like text messages or emails. Now, if you're using a password manager, most of those have ways to send passwords securely. 99.9999% of the time, you should not be sharing passwords. You can usually, like, if let's say you want to give access to someone else, create an account for them so that they can log in. Writing passwords down, keeping a physical list of passwords near the computer or workspace, the famous sticky note, don't do it. Not using two-factor authentication, failing to enable two-factor authentication when it's available, which is available almost everywhere now, enable it. Even if it's the SMS, which is the least secure of all the different two-factor authentication methods, still enable it. It's better than nothing. Clicking on phishing links. We talked about phishing last week. I haven't had a chance to upload it yet, but I will. Falling for phishing scams that prompt users to enter their password on fake login pages. In the scenario from today that I'm going to review in a little bit, that's exactly what it was. Avoiding password managers, not using password managers because of misconceptions. Reputable password managers can help generate and store complex passwords securely. So there is a belief out there that password managers are risky because they're on the internet. And yes, they can be compromised. In fact, the one that I use has been compromised. However, I have extra security in place. And if you do that, then you're still not at risk. Yeah, so that's everything. Oh, no, it's not. Using dictionary words, passwords that are regular words focused or found in a dictionary can be susceptible to dictionary attacks. Again, these are lists of common dictionary words that they will try against whatever account they're trying to compromise. And ignoring password strength meters when setting up passwords on platforms that provide strength meters, ignoring the meter feedback. And then also not monitoring your accounts. So if you don't pay attention to your accounts to see if anything is gotten into it or anyone has gotten into it, then you're putting yourself at risk. So what does a strong password look like then? Kind of touched on it before, but a longer password generally means a stronger password. Again, experts say you should aim for at least 12 to 16 characters. I almost always use 20, but I never go below 15. A variety of characters, uppercase, lowercase numbers, and special characters. And, special characters like exclamation points, the @ symbol, pound symbol, $sign, percent, caret, ampersand, and the asterisk. I'm impressed I remember the names of all those. Avoiding dictionary words we just talked about. Avoid easily guessable information or public information. So, if I can go on the internet and figure out where most people live today. If you use your home address in your password, you shouldn't, because it's not hard to find out where people live. It's fairly public. No keyboard patterns, sequences like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, QWERTY, or ASD, FGH. These are all easily guessable and commonly used as well. Use phrases. So some people prefer to use phrases. So they'll use a song lyric or a movie quote, but then they'll change something in that song lyric. So let's say I used Now Use Can't Leave. One of my favorite movies is A Bronx Tale. And I just shared personal information, but that's okay. Now Use Can't Leave as my quote, movie quote. So I'll make some of the letters uppercase. I'll change the O to a 0. Maybe I'll misspell something, and I'll add a couple special characters in there. So that is a method that some people use. The problem is, again, you're not reusing passwords if you're following good password policy. So then you're going to have to remember which account had which special quote, and that's going to be problematic for you. But if you have a password manager, then the problem's solved. Randomness. The more random your password, the better. Password managers often have password generators. I'm going to show you one in a little bit that can create random passwords for you. And there are tons of those out there. So I'll share some of the more common password managers. And you can make your own, you can draw your own conclusion. We don't resell any of them. So avoid repetitive or sequential characters like 6 A's or ABC 1 2 3 or 1 1 1 1 1. Two-factor authentication should be on for everything. And then, so there's two-factor authentication and there's multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication takes two-factor authentication to the next level and means, so now you have your password and you have a second form of authentication and then maybe a third form of authentication. And that could be, are you in the right location? Or can you verify with a retina scan or a thumbprint or something like that? Or do you have a key that an electric key or an RFID reader that you can use? So these are all other methods of authentication that can be added. Regular updates. While you shouldn't change your password too frequently without reason, it's a good practice to update it periodically, especially if it's any indication of a security breach. Check for breaches. There are services out there. One of them is called Have I Been Pawned? I'll share another one with you shortly, where you could check to see if your email account has been involved in a data breach. And why that's important? Well, let's use the LinkedIn example again. If my LinkedIn account has been breached, and that means that email account and password have been involved in a data breach, I now have to worry about, did I use that email account and password anywhere else, and then change it there too. Again, good reason to use a password manager. And then use a password manager. Kind of mention that. This is the password generator that I usually use. I also created a code to do this on my computer, my personal computer. So it's a Python program that generates it, but this is just fine. This is LastPass password generator, and you just put in the password length, and it generates the password for you. You copy it, use it within whatever account you're trying to add the password to. And then if you use LastPass for your password management, you can save it there as well. So this is the type of password you'll find on all of my accounts. You can put a gun to my head right now, and I would not be able to tell you what any of my passwords are, except for my LastPass password. Don't get any ideas though. So the LastPass, even if you have that, we're going to talk about 2FA now. This is a good place to tell you about a YubiKey. And there are other brands. Google also makes one. I forget what it's called, but they make one as well. But a YubiKey is a USB key that I put in my computer, and my Microsoft account, and some of the other accounts that I log into, including LastPass, I need that key to log in, and I have to physically touch it with it plugged into my computer for that to work. So that's multi-factor authentication. That's my second factor of authentication for some of those devices. But with Microsoft, I have multiple factors. With the account that I have for managing my clients' computers, I have it set up to only be able to log into 2 different locations. So I have to be either in my office, or I have to log into a cloud computing instance that has its own IP address. And that is the only way I can log into my clients' computers. 2-factor authentication stands for two-factor authentication, or 2FA stands for two-factor authentication. You may also see it as TFA in some places, but 2FA is more common branding for it. It is a security mechanism that requires users to provide 2 distinct forms of identification before gaining access to an account or system. This approach adds an additional layer of security compared to traditional single-factor authentication, where only a password is required. So in this instance, you have a password and you have some other form of authentication. The more common ones are your application on a phone, and the most common ones are Google, Microsoft, or Authy, but there are others out there. Or text message, or you could use phone call for some. Again, the YubiKey is the one that I use for some things. It's not widely available on multiple systems yet, but for Microsoft, for Google, for LastPass, it is available. But most commonly it's something you know. So that would be a PIN generated in an app on your phone. This is probably the most common one that you'll see today. SMS is an option. It is not the best option because of things like SIM swapping, where they steal your phone. Basically, they may not steal your physical phone, but they somehow get your SIM card information and insert it into a new phone. And that's when SMS authentication could become a problem. Again, authentication apps like Google Authenticator, Authy, Microsoft Authenticator, they're more common. If you've ever worked in an environment, they would give you a little key ring, like I don't know what they call it. I don't remember what they call it, but it's something that generated a code every 30 seconds. That's the apps do that today on the smartphones, but they used to be, it looked like a USB thumb drive. So they used to use this hardware token. That's what it is. Push notifications. That's sort of the direction Microsoft is moving now for their logins. So you would get a push notification on your phone through an app, and then it would ask you for the number that was generated in that push notification. So you have to first approve it and then put the number in on the device you're trying to log in on. There is a thing called MFA fatigue, or 2FA fatigue, you may have heard about. And what that means is people are getting their multi-factor authentication compromised because they're tired of dealing with it, in a sense. So one scenario is a gentleman called me up, and his email account was compromised. He was getting emails from himself, from his email account saying, pay us, I think it was 300 Bitcoin or something like that, and we'll give you your email account back. But he was still able to log into it because they hadn't changed anything yet. They wanted to still be able to communicate with him and collect this money from him. They maintained access. I'm not sure how they did that, but he contacted Microsoft, and in doing so, he forgot that his cell phone was connected to the account, and so he was receiving text message to log in. The next day, the people that compromised his account realized that he was doing this, and they sent him a text message saying, "Can you verify the 2-factor authentication code we just sent you?" Pretending to be Microsoft. And Microsoft, of course, sent him a 2-factor authentication because the hackers were trying to remove his phone and add their own phone to the account. And so he did send the code, and that was the end of it. He lost the account for once and for all after that. So they're much savvier today than they used to be, these cyber attacks, and they're getting smarter, and they have tools like AI available to them now that's helping them with these scams. Another theme I see a lot of, I don't know why, but I see this a lot in insurance, is they don't want to turn on two-factor authentication because it's too much of a hassle. Well, in insurance, you typically have a lot of client data. You have their, maybe payment information, you have home address, you have VIN numbers, you probably have driver's license numbers, you have maybe even loan information for your mortgages and your cars, things like that. And not putting two-factor authentication or some other form of authentication on this seems crazy. And I don't know why it's not being enforced by the systems that they're using. And maybe it is, and they found a way around it. I don't know, but it seems to happen a lot with insurance. Check with your insurance provider to make sure that they are using two-factor authentication. So how does two-factor authentication add an extra layer of security? It's by adding an extra step to trying to log in. It's going to prevent it. Actually, I don't know if the numbers changed. This was a couple of years ago, but it prevented 99% of data breaches. But remember, we're not using it across the board yet. It's still a very low number of acceptance with two-factor authentication. So there's redundancy in authentication, protection against stolen credentials. So if your password was stolen and then they try to log in, which again would be the scenario that I just was made aware of today, because of two-factor authentication, they will not be able to get in. Mitigating keylogger risks. If you're not familiar with a keylogger is a device or a program that monitors every keystroke you take on your computer. So if they're doing this, they eventually will see you type in a password, and they will steal this. They take the entire log of keystrokes and cipher it to find the passwords they're looking for. Deters credential stuffing, which is password cracking, essentially. Keep trying the same password over and over. Well, if there's two-factor authentication turned on, then they're not going to get past, even if they get the right password, they're not going to get past it. Time-sensitive codes. If you're using an app on your phone, they generate a new code every 30 seconds. And so this is the other challenge with text messaging. The code will be good, usually good for like 10 or 15 minutes. So it gives them a little time to figure it out or try to con someone into giving up the code. With an app on your phone or the hardware-based tokens, the codes are only good for 30 seconds. Location and device awareness. Some two-factor authentication implementations can detect unusual locations or new devices trying to access an account. Protection against phishing. Again, the scenario I'm going to review in a moment. It's harder to be phished if you have two-factor authentication on because they still need that second code to get in. Real-time alerts. Many two-factor authentication solutions notify users in real time when a login attempt is made. That would be the text message-based ones. The apps don't do that, but again, they're a lot more secure than text message. And then it's a physical barrier, because if you're using a hardware-based or a smartphone and not using SMS-based two-factor authentication, it's going to be harder to gain access to that. Even if they do SIM swap or SIM jack your phone, they will not have access to your Microsoft Authenticator or Authy or Google Authenticator. I just had someone switch their phone. They got a new phone, the old phone broke. And because they didn't back up their Microsoft Authenticator, they had no access to it anymore. So they couldn't get into their account until I reset their authentication. And then the YubiKey, again, physical access. A hacker is not going to gain physical access unless they're in your office or they happen to steal it from you somehow. You should be generating or creating password policies within your organization. This is to ensure that everybody's on the same page. Now, some of this can be enforced. So, for example, I could enforce on computers length of passwords as well as password complexity. So Microsoft, as an example, allows you to turn on password complexity, and that means you have to use 3 of the 4 characters. So you have to use uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and or special characters in your password. And then I could say, make the passwords 14 characters, and I could tell Microsoft to force password changes every 45 days or something like that. So some of that can be enforced, but the organization should have a policy that says the length of your password needs to be whatever, 15 characters. What character types should be in the password? You should avoid dictionary words, names, dates, and common phrases. How often should we change the password? How often or how many password changes do you have to do before you can reuse a password? So as an example, you should not use this same password within the next 5 password changes. There should be a temporary, so when I reset a password for a client, they get a temporary password for their account, and then they have to change the password. I never want to know anybody's password, and nor should anybody else. So they have to change it when they first log in. There should be an account lockout period. So if you've attempted the same password too many times, the account needs to be locked out, and the only way back in is you either wait and hopefully have the same password or figure out what the password is, or you have to contact an admin to turn off the account lockout and change the password. Password storage, you should never store it on a sticky note or a notepad that you carry around or anything like that. Or as was said earlier, don't store it on a Word document or a PDF on your computer. It's bad news. Even on your phones today are all encrypted, but if they happen to guess your phone password or whatever method of logging into your phone you use, or they somehow circumvent it, then they have access to your passwords. You should be using a password manager, which I'll show you in a moment. Never share or transmit passwords. If you do have a reason to transmit a password for whatever reason, should be very rare. But if you do, make sure it's transmitted using encryption. Do admins of apps have access to my password, or is it encrypted? It should be encrypted. And it really depends on the app. If it's an in-house app that somebody created, it's possible that it's not encrypted. But if, as an example, for Microsoft 365, I don't know anybody's passwords. I have my own password, and I can go in and reset their password if I need to, but I don't know their passwords. So that's the way it should be. I have been in organizations where passwords were being shared, and people do know other people's passwords, and that's bad news. Because now what happens if that person logs in and does something? They're going to blame you. If you do transmit passwords and you're using a password manager, that's the way to do it. But if you're going to send it in an email or something like that, do it with an encrypted email. Make sure 2-factor or multi-factor authentication is turned on. Password recovery, this should include things like security questions, verification via phone or text. It was recommended to do verification over email, but that seems silly if you're trying to reset an email password to do it through email to verify. So I would avoid doing that. Training and awareness. Well, here you are, you got trained, and we're making you aware. And then what are the consequences for not complying with this policy? That should also be documented. Here's some password managers. There are definitely a lot more than this, but these are some of the most popular ones according to Google. So LastPass is the one I use. 1Password, Dashlane. I've used Dashlane in the past. I've used 1Password in the past. Bitwarden, RoboForm, Keeper. I've also tried. I hear really good things about Keeper. I just didn't follow through with it. KeePass I've used many years ago. KeePass is not internet-based. It's computer-based, so you can save it to your computer and use it on there. And if you're worried about some of these other ones because they're internet-based, then KeePass would be the way to go. RoboForm I'm not too familiar with. NordPass, I do have a client that uses NordPass. And Sticky Password I'm also not familiar with. I will tell you, LastPass and Keeper, those are the two I'm most familiar with. I know for sure that they use the highest level encryption to store passwords. And part of their password, part of their encryption is your master password. So they take their encryption and then add your master password to the encryption. So that makes it even that much harder to crack. And then on top of that, you use something, you know, whether it's some form of two-factor authentication, preferably either an app on your phone or a YubiKey or something similar, then it makes it even that much harder. And this is a site I went to. So that password that I showed you earlier in the beginning of the presentation, not the word password, but the longer password. If you go to Password Monster and you put that in, it tells you that it'll take 297 million trillion years to crack. So what that means is software that's out there that will crack passwords, it will take that software roughly, I'm not even sure, like I can't even wrap my head around what that means, but 297 million trillion years. Now that's with today's computing power. That will change with quantum computing. Not sure, you know, when that's going to be readily available to people, but it is out there already. Google has quantum computing. I would imagine Amazon, Microsoft do as well. But if you put that word that I had, password, the uppercase P in the @ it says 0 seconds because the password cracker has it in its list and it's going to attempt it. That was Password Monster. And then finally, if you do want to do a dark web scan on my end, which is similar to haveibeenpawned.com. So this is the one that I referenced earlier. You just go there, put your email address in, and it'll tell you if it's been in any breaches. You could also go to my website, watchtech.com, go to resources and click on dark web scan, and you can do that from there. So the scenario from today that I wanted to talk about. A client sent me an email saying that they received won't accept my weak password for app. Any suggestions? You would have to strengthen the password.
Yeah, I did that, but it still says it's not strong enough. It says I check off all the boxes except strength meter at maximum.
And it still won't take it.
Yeah, it's weird.
Only thing I can think of is maybe that password is on a breach somewhere.
It's something I use, so that's bad.
Yeah, I would check to see if it's been involved in a breach.
How do you do that?
So this website I put in the chat, haveibeenpawned.com, or you can go to my website and go to resources and dark web scan and do it from there.
And so, what have you been on?
It's in the chat. Have I been PW?
Oh, it's right there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, you just go there and put the email address that you're using in and see if it shows up in any breaches. And if any of those breaches use that same password, there's a good chance that that's why LastPass is refusing it.
Thanks again.
So the scenario from today, I got an email from a client and they last week received an email from another office that they work with, another business they work with, saying that they had sensitive documents and that they needed to log in to review these sensitive encrypted documents. So they clicked the link, tried to log in twice, couldn't get in. So she then sent an email back to the person saying that they couldn't get in. Could you just send the document in plain text? There was a response that was kind of a weird response. So the office then called the email sender up, and that email sender said that her email had been compromised and that she didn't send any of those emails. So the email today was panic mode because now they realized that their passwords may have been compromised. Because it's a client, we monitor for suspicious logins, and I didn't get any alerts for that. So I know their account wasn't compromised, but they also use two-factor authentication with an app on their phone. So I know that it would have, somebody would have had to have access to that as well. Of course, I said, go change your password immediately, and anywhere else you might be using those passwords, change it there as well. But this is, real world examples, and I see this all the time. I see the emails all the time. Most of the time, they get forwarded to me because they do seem suspicious. But this particular incident, they had recent conversations via email about something they were working on together, so they suspected that it was a legitimate email. And so this is the problem with phishing right now. And so they stole another email account to then communicate with other potential victims, and this happens a lot. So you have to be very careful with what you're clicking on. Look to see what it was that you clicked on. Did it go to Microsoft, or did it go somewhere else, or did it go to Google, or did it go to somewhere else? Just make sure you're logging in to whatever it is, that it's legitimate. Or you could just go to the link. If it's Microsoft, you got to log into Microsoft to review it. Just log in, go to Microsoft.com or portal.office.com manually and log in that way. There are extra layers of protection that can be implemented, but they're not foolproof. And Microsoft actually blocks out 80 to 90% of these attacks anyway, but this one still got through. This was Microsoft, by the way. And this one still got through. So it does happen that they get through, and that's where having two-factor authentication enabled. So Microsoft is pretty much enforcing two-factor authentication now, but you can still turn it off. So there are businesses that say, I don't want to have to deal with two-factor authentication, turn it off. I don't want to work with any of those businesses, but I know they're out there. Because that's putting myself at risk, because then when you get breached, now it looks bad on me too. Any questions? As always, if you want to follow us or review this training later, you can follow us on, this will be on YouTube eventually, but also Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We've been sharing cybersecurity awareness tips all month, 2 weeks to go. So you can go check that out as well. And if there are no other questions, you guys can go back to your work or lunch or whatever you want to do.